What if the woman you fired turned out to be the only one your child would ever call home? What if the scandal wasn't in what she did, but in how far others would go to silence the truth? This is not just a story about motherhood. It's about who stays when love becomes inconvenient. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The first thing Elena March noticed was the silence. Not the kind you find in peaceful places. This was heavier, like it had weight to it. The kind of silence that pressed against the walls of Briar Hill Estate and settled into the bones of the house. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before passing through. She paused in the foyer, clutching the strap of her canvas bag. The marble floor stretched beneath her feet like a hotel lobby, not a home. Everything was clean, curated, expensive, but hollow. A grand piano stood untouched beneath a sheet. The fireplace was spotless cold, and not a single photograph anywhere. A woman in a stiff black uniform walked by without a glance. Another man carried a tray past her with military precision. Neither said a word. Elena gave a polite nod. Nothing. It had been 6 years since she left her position at Holloway Caring Network. Back then, she had a title, Coordinator of Emotional Care Services. She'd trained caregivers, built support systems, even lectured at conferences. And then, after the accident, she stopped everything. Now she was just Elena, a private caregiver for hire. She'd said yes to this job because the agency said the boy needed someone patient but firm. But no one mentioned how clinical the house would feel, or how tightly controlled everything was. "Miss March," a voice said. A tall man in his early 40s stood at the base of the staircase. Tailored suit. Watch that cost more than her car. Not unkind, but unreadable. Graham Vance. "I appreciate punctuality," he said. "Elliot is upstairs. You'll receive a schedule. He eats alone, studies with his therapist 3 times a week, and requires minimal social stimulation. I trust you'll remain within professional boundaries." Professional boundaries. Elena nodded, biting back a response. She knew that tone. Polite walls wrapped in money. Later that evening, after dinner trays had come and gone, Elena wandered the second floor quietly, unsure if she was even allowed to. She passed a narrow hallway and saw a small figure at the far end, standing by a window. Still, too still for a child. Elliot, 7 years old, pale skin, hair like ash. He didn't turn when she approached, didn't blink when her shadow reached him. He just stood, arms crossed, gaze fixed on nothing. She stopped a few feet behind, didn't say his name, didn't offer a smile. Just stood there, gently, like setting something fragile on a shelf. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then his shoulders moved barely. "I'm not here to fix you," she said softly. "I'm just here." No answer. But something shifted. He didn't run, didn't flinch, and Elena knew. Not because of words or gestures, but from the way the air settled between them. The boy had heard her. Maybe not with his ears, but with whatever part of a child listens when no one else sees them. From down the hall, she could feel the red light of a camera blinking. But she didn't move, didn't back away, because sometimes being allowed to stay was louder than any welcome. Elena had only been at Briar Hill a week, and yet the house already felt like a place time refused to touch. Mornings came without birdsong, only the hum of distant machinery from the grounds and the soft mechanical purr of security cameras turning. The staff moved like pieces on a chessboard, predictable, quiet, tightly wound. She had started leaving a box of crayons and a few sheets of paper on the side table in Elliot's room. No fuss, no questions, just there, beside the window he always sat near, staring out like he was waiting for someone who'd never come. At first, nothing happened. Then, one morning, A few colored lines, uneven, aimless, but still, they were there. The next day, a crooked sun. Then, a lopsided house. Elena didn't comment. She simply taped the drawings to the wall beside his bed, one by one, like adding small pieces to a puzzle she wasn't allowed to see finished. Elliot hadn't spoken to her, not even once. But on the third day, when she entered his room, he looked up from the corner. Just for a second, then went back to his drawing. She counted that as something. A shift. A beginning. That afternoon, while setting down a cup of tea in the kitchen, she heard footsteps, measured, heavy. Graham appeared without warning, holding one of Elliot's drawings in his hand. "This wasn't part of the recovery protocol," he said, voice flat as concrete. Elena stayed still. "No, it wasn't. You were given specific instructions," he continued. "Elliot's care has been carefully coordinated with specialists. Deviating from that plan compromises everything we've worked toward." "He's making progress," she said gently. "This is his way of communicating. You may not see it yet, but I do. He's showing signs of emotional recognition. Connection." Graham's eyes narrowed. "You're here to provide structure. Routine. Nothing more." There was a pause, short, sharp. Then he dropped the drawing onto the counter between them. "Don't confuse comfort with effectiveness." With that, he turned and left. Elena stared at the paper, a childlike version of a figure holding an umbrella over another. No faces, just a sense of closeness, of care. That night, the silence in the house stretched a little farther. She noticed the hallway lights dimmed slightly earlier than usual. Staff avoided eye contact. A camera above the stairwell now tilted a few degrees more toward the guest wing, toward her room. She didn't say anything. The next morning, while Elena was folding laundry in the side hall, a woman she hadn't seen before stepped through the double glass doors. Elegant, composed, wearing a navy blue blouse with gold buttons and a scent that reminded Elena of cold perfume counters. "I'm Miranda," the woman said, scanning the space like someone conducting an inspection. "Graham's sister." Elena stood straight. "Pleasure to meet you." Miranda's gaze lingered on the stack of laundry in Elena's hands, then moved to the hallway camera behind her. "You've been here a week?" "Yes, I see." Miranda didn't smile, but her lips curved slightly, like she knew something Elena didn't. "I always find it interesting who Graham chooses. You seem calm." "I try to be," Elena said. Miranda nodded slowly. "Good luck, then." And just like that, she turned and walked off. That evening, as Elena helped Elliot get ready for bed, she noticed him hesitate before climbing under the blanket. His eyes drifted toward the drawing wall. His fingers reached up and tapped one picture, just once. Then he crawled beneath the covers without a word. Later, as she passed the main hallway, the housekeeper, Janice, a woman with kind eyes and tired hands, leaned in and whispered, "You're the fourth one in 6 months." Elena blinked. "What happened to the others?" Janice glanced around before answering. "Some quit. Some weren't asked to stay." She offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "This place has its own rhythm. Most people don't last long." After Janice disappeared into the dark of the West Wing, Elena stood alone for a while. Her thoughts turned to the red lights blinking in every hallway. The way Elliot never reached for anyone. The way Graham treated emotions like they were broken switches, better left untouched. There was something about this house that felt curated, controlled, like a museum exhibit of what a family used to be. Back in her room, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on. The sound of the rain tapping against the glass reminded her of nights spent in her own son's room, before everything had changed. She used to sit like this back then too, waiting for something to break the quiet. But at Briarhill, the quiet didn't break. It swallowed. There was a quiet kind of pattern to Elliot Vance, subtle, but steady. Elena started noticing it in the way he always picked the red crayon first, even if he never used it. How he aligned his toy cars by color, not size, and realigned them if anyone dared to touch them. How he moved through the hallways like a ghost who knew the house better than anyone else, but didn't want to be seen. What stood out most, though, was his time at the upstairs window. Same place every day. Just after his late lunch, he'd sit there with his back to the wall, and his legs folded tight to his chest, eyes fixed on the gravel driveway and hedges below. Not watching for anyone, it seemed. Just existing. The light would pour in over his shoulders, casting him in this golden outline that made him look almost too fragile to disturb. So she didn't disturb him. Instead, Elena began to leave small things behind. A quiet offering, a stack of drawing paper on the desk by the window, a pack of slightly dull crayons, leftovers from a bin she'd kept, almost without knowing why. No instructions, no pressure, just paper, just color. 3 days passed with nothing. She didn't ask. She didn't look disappointed. She simply adjusted the stack now and then, always with a softness, as if touching something sacred. On the 4th morning, she found a drawing left behind. It was lying half off the table, like Elliot wasn't sure if he wanted it seen. There was a single curved line in soft gray, and beneath it, a small stick figure. Around the figure, faint blue dots, rain maybe. The curved line looked like the corner of a roof. No name, no words, just shelter. Elena stared at it for a while, then carefully taped it on the wall next to the desk. She didn't say anything to Elliot, but as she pressed the final corner of tape, she whispered, just loud enough for the paper to hear. Even the rain needs somewhere to hide. That evening, Miranda appeared in the corridor outside the sunroom. As usual, her presence felt deliberate, never rushed, never random. She held a porcelain teacup in one hand and gave Elena a nod that wasn't quite an invitation, but not a command either. "Elena," she said, voice smooth like she'd been practicing it. "Do you have a moment?" Elena hesitated, then followed her into the room, filled with long shadows and the smell of lavender polish. Miranda poured 2 cups of tea and gestured toward the chair across from her. "So," Miranda began, placing one ankle over the other, "you've settled in rather quickly." "I suppose," Elena answered, cautious. Miranda smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Graham usually burns through caregivers, but you seem different." Elena didn't respond right away. Miranda leaned in slightly. "You had a promising career once, didn't you? Holloway Network. Regional coordinator. That's not a minor position." "Things change," Elena replied, her voice steady. "They do," Miranda agreed. "But most people don't walk away from leadership roles to fold laundry and tape up children's drawings." Elena looked down at her cup. Some things matter more. Miranda's silence lingered for a second too long. When Elena finally excused herself, the air felt heavier than when she'd walked in. Back upstairs, Elliot's room was dim, but his door stood ajar. Just enough to notice he was awake. She paused in the hall, not wanting to intrude. Then she saw him move, not toward the bed, but toward the desk. She watched from a respectful distance as he picked up another sheet of paper and pressed crayon to it. Short lines, slow strokes, no rush. When he finished, he folded the paper once, then walked to the doorway and looked up at her. Without speaking, he handed it to her. The paper was warm in her hands. This drawing was more detailed, the same curved roof from before, but now beneath it stood a figure with hair drawn in tight curls. More than just lines this time, a texture. One arm stretched above the child's stick figure, sheltering it. Around them, tiny blue marks, more rain, but none falling beneath the arc of the arm. At the bottom, in uneven block letters, "You are the umbrella." Elena stared at the page. She didn't know if he understood the weight of those words, or if he just felt something and found a way to give it form. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. Elliot didn't say anything. He just looked at her for another second, then turned and climbed into bed. She stood there a little longer, holding the drawing like it was stitched together from threadbare pieces of her own past. No one had needed her like this in a long, long time. Elena had never been one to feel watched. Not in the way that made your skin crawl, or your breath sit too high in your chest. But lately, something inside the walls of Briarhill felt different. Off, like the house was holding its breath and recording the way she moved through it. The staff, once quietly indifferent, had grown quieter still. One of the kitchen workers, Maya, stopped her in the hallway near the linen closet late one morning. Elena had only come by to drop off folded towels, but Maya glanced down the hall before leaning in. "Be careful," she whispered, barely audible. "It's not just surveillance here. They don't watch to protect. They watch to replace." Elena blinked. "What do you mean?" "The cameras," Maya said. "They don't just track movement. They log expression, tone, timing. It's all about control. Miranda's been collecting patterns. Reasons to say you're not right for this job." She didn't say more, just walked off, carrying a tray of silverware that suddenly felt a little too polished, too perfectly aligned. That afternoon, Elena stepped out into the garden to catch her breath. Fresh air at Briarhill was rare, always laced with trimmed hedges, controlled blooms, not a petal out of place. As she rounded the side gate near the garage, she spotted someone she didn't recognize. A man, mid-30s, dark jacket, neutral smile, leaned against a black SUV, eyes casually scanning the second floor of the estate. Elena approached, cautiously. "You looking for someone?" He smiled. "Just waiting for Mr. Vance." "You security?" "Technically," he said. "Name's Kyle. Private firm. Discreet coverage." She nodded, not quite buying it. He looked past her, toward the side entrance of the house. "Big place. Easy to get lost. Not if you know where you belong," she said. Their eyes met just long enough for something unspoken to settle. Then she turned and walked back inside. That weekend, Graham allowed her to take Elliot to the market. He called it an exposure activity, part of Elliot's ongoing therapy. But Elena knew it wasn't about therapy. It was a test of her, of how she'd handle him outside controlled walls. Elliot clung close at first, fingers tight around the canvas strap of her bag. But as they passed rows of tomatoes and baskets of strawberries, he started to loosen. She handed him a pair to carry, then let him choose a bunch of sunflowers for the kitchen. "Your pick," she told him with a smile. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. On their way back, Elena made a last-minute stop at the Rosewood Diner. She'd worked there 2 years ago, after her son's death. Those long, aching months where she couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still, just needed something to fill the hours. She hadn't been back since. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped inside. "Sit anywhere," a woman behind the counter called without looking up. But then she did look up. Her eyes widened. "Elena!" Elena froze. "God, I haven't seen you since the accident. You okay now?" The words hit like a cold slap. Elliot, still holding her hand, looked up at her. She could feel his eyes searching her face. The tightness in her throat grew. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just grabbing pie." But the damage was done. The past, once again, had found its way to the surface. Outside, Elliot stayed quiet for a long time. They walked the edge of the parking lot in silence, her hand still wrapped around his. Then, just before they reached the car, he tugged on her sleeve. She looked down. He reached up and took her hand tight, small fingers curling into hers, and whispered, "You're still the umbrella, even if lightning hits." Elena stopped. Her breath caught somewhere in her chest. Her knees almost gave out right there in the gravel. She hadn't told him about the crash, about the boy, about the nights she still woke up sweating from dreams she couldn't escape. But somehow, he knew. Or maybe he didn't need to know the details. Maybe he just saw the sadness she thought she buried. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Not from shame, not even from grief, but from the weight of being seen. Elena knelt to his level and hugged him, gently, her cheek against his temple. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise you're safe." And for the first time in years, she almost believed she was too. By the time Elena made it upstairs with the fresh towels, Elliot's bedroom door was already open. That wasn't unusual. He'd gotten comfortable enough to leave it that way lately. But the quiet inside felt heavier than normal. She stepped in slowly, arms full, and immediately noticed the drawings. They were everywhere, taped to the wall, tucked into the corners of the bookshelf, lined up on the windowsill. Elliot's style was unmistakable now. Curly lines for hair, umbrella shapes, hands that always reached out. In most of the drawings, there were two figures, one of them smaller, one taller, both standing under something that looked like shelter. One stood out, taped at eye level just above his pillow. It showed Elliot hugging someone. The taller figure had thick curls, a gentle smile, and arms wrapped around the child like wings. Elena felt a swell rise in her chest, gratitude, fear, something harder to name. "Who told you to put these up?" A sharp voice snapped from the hallway. She turned. Graham stood in the doorway, stiff with disapproval, his eyes locked on the wall. "Elliot did," she said, setting the towels down quietly. "He wanted them here." Graham stepped into the room, peeled one of the drawings from the wall like it was a dirty tissue, and held it up between them. "This isn't therapy. This is sentimentality. That's not what he needs." "He's not a patient," Elena replied, holding her voice steady. "He's a little boy." "He's a little boy in treatment," Graham said, "with a structured plan laid out by professionals. You don't get to rewrite that because he draws you into a picture." She stepped closer, carefully. "I didn't ask him to draw me. I didn't tape those up to make a point. But if he's finding comfort in them, finding voice in them, how is that wrong?" Graham's jaw tightened. "He needs boundaries, not emotional indulgence. He needs connection," she said softly. "And feelings aren't trash, Mr. Vance. They're not messes we clean up just because they make a room uncomfortable." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he let out a slow breath. "If you can't stay within the framework we've given you, I'll find someone who will." She didn't flinch. "If that's what you believe he needs." Behind them, Elliot sat on the floor, quiet but listening. His eyes flicked between the two adults. He didn't speak, but Elena could see the way his shoulders curled inward. When Graham turned to leave, Miranda was already there, standing just around the corner like she'd been waiting. "Quite a passionate exchange," she murmured. "Is everything under control?" "Barely," Graham muttered. "She's personalizing the care again." Miranda tilted her head slightly. "Well, if she's becoming too emotionally involved, there are ways to manage perception. Sometimes you don't have to fire someone. You just have to reshape how the world sees them." He looked at her sharply. "You think we need to go that far?" "She's endearing herself to him," Miranda said, almost like it was a diagnosis. "Once that narrative spreads, it becomes harder to undo. Better to control it now, subtly, before it becomes a problem you can't spin." Graham didn't answer. Later that evening, Elena walked past Elliot's room again. The drawings were gone from the wall. Clean white paint stared back at her like a silence she wasn't allowed to fill. But something new had taken their place, tucked neatly on the floor near the edge of his bed. A fresh drawing. This time, it showed a dining table with 3 figures seated: Elliot, Graham, and Elena. No one told him to draw it. No one could stop him either. She bent to pick it up, fingers trembling just a little. In the middle of the table, he'd drawn a pie, badly shaped but unmistakable. It was the same one she'd let him taste last week at the market. He remembered. He saw. Whatever lines Graham tried to erase, Elliot kept redrawing. Again and again. Because to him, Elena wasn't a visitor. She wasn't even staff. She was someone who belonged. Elena had just finished folding the last of Elliot's laundry when the housekeeper, Nora, appeared at the door, her eyes avoiding direct contact. "They want to see you." "Office." Elena set the basket down, already feeling a cold not tighten in her stomach. The way Nora spoke, curt, almost rehearsed, felt like a warning. She walked through the hallway with its polished wood floors that no longer echoed the familiar warmth she once imagined they might hold. When she opened the door to Graham's office, he didn't look up at first. Miranda was already seated, legs crossed, one manicured hand resting on a folded newspaper. Her lips curved in something too polite to be a smile. Graham finally glanced up, jaw tight. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he unfolded the newspaper and laid it flat on the desk, tapping twice on the top of the page. The Arcline Ledger. Her eyes landed on the title of the piece. A child lost a second chance? Behind the smiles of a caregiver's redemption. Her breath hitched. It didn't name her, but it didn't need to. The piece outlined in chilling, calculated precision the story of a woman who once fell asleep behind the wheel after an overnight shift, crashing into a median, her 5-year-old son in the back seat. He died on impact. Now, the article claimed, she was rebuilding her image by placing herself close to another vulnerable child. This time, the heir of one of Charleston's most influential families. She, the article ended, may carry her grief like a quiet badge, but grief does not erase judgment. Some risks are too high to take twice. Elena couldn't speak. Graham leaned back, arms folded. His voice was low, heavy with condescension. "I believed in giving people second chances. Clearly, I extended that belief too far. I never hid my past," Elena said quietly. "It wasn't a secret. It wasn't public either," Miranda chimed in smoothly, lifting the edge of the paper like a teacup. "And in a home like this, privacy is a luxury we can't afford. Especially when trust is currency." Elena's jaw clenched. "Who sent that story in?" Miranda didn't answer. She didn't have to. Graham stood. "Your contract is terminated, effective immediately. Security will see you out. You are not to return to this house or make contact with Elliot." Elena blinked, the room going slightly blurry. Not from tears, but from the sheer weight of déjà vu losing a child. Being told she wasn't fit. That she was dangerous. That her grief was a flaw, not a wound. As she turned to go, a scream rang through the hallway. No! It was Elliot. He had never shouted before, but now he did. Raw, primal. The sound of something breaking. He ran toward her, but 2 staff members stopped him. He thrashed, trying to reach her. When they restrained him, he began clawing at his own arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Elena!" he screamed. "No, Elena!" She wasn't allowed to go to him. Graham's voice, sharp and controlled, cut through the chaos. "Get him upstairs." As Elliot disappeared down the hall, still crying her name, Elena turned away. Her steps felt hollow. In her room, she packed in silence. No one spoke to her. No one looked her in the eye. It wasn't just dismissal. It was exile. Before leaving, she walked quietly into the study. She found Elliot's favorite picture book, The Weather Tree. Its cover was frayed at the corners, its pages bent from use. She opened it to the middle and slipped in a folded piece of paper, pressed gently between chapters. On it, in soft blue ink, she had written, "Storms come and go, but if you still need an umbrella, I'll be somewhere dry, waiting." She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. Then she left. Not with a goodbye. Not with a scream. But with that quiet emptiness that follows when something precious is ripped from you, and you don't know if you'll ever be allowed to touch it again. Outside, the sky threatened rain. Inside, she carried her grief like before. Only heavier now, because this time someone had cried for her. Someone had reached back. And still, she'd had to let go. It had been 7 days since Elena left Briarhill. A week of silence, of unanswered calls and unopened emails from Holloway Caring Network. She hadn't turned on the television. Her phone remained face down on the kitchen counter, its battery long dead. The outside world could wait, or forget. She didn't care which came first. Each morning she made a pot of coffee, drank 1 cup, and poured the rest down the sink. The blinds stayed drawn, casting the small Charleston apartment in a permanent twilight. Even the air felt heavy, like something unspoken clung to every corner. She hadn't cried since that day. Until today. It started with a knock. Not a loud one, just 3 light taps at the door, like someone didn't really want to disturb her. She waited, thinking maybe they'd go away. But then came the voice, gentle, apologetic. Delivery for Elena March? She opened the door just wide enough to see a young man in a blue courier uniform, holding a small cardboard box. No branding, no return address, just her name printed on a white label. "Sign here, ma'am," he said, offering the device. She signed, nodded, and shut the door before he could say more. Back inside, she set the box on the kitchen table and stared at it. Her hands hovered over the tape. Then, slowly, she peeled it back. Inside lay a stack of papers, child's drawings. Crayon on construction paper, uneven edges, fingerprints smudged in corners. The first one showed 2 stick figures huddled under a big blue arc, scribbled rain falling around them. One figure had curls. The other had a red shirt like the one Elliot always wore. She flipped to the next. Another image. Elena and Elliot sitting on a bench, the sun peeking out from clouds. Another. Elena reading, Elliot curled beside her like a cat. By the 4th drawing, her hands began to tremble. And then she saw it. At the bottom of the stack, scrawled in messy, brave letters. "I still need the umbrella." That's when the tears came. They didn't rush or burst like before. They slipped out quietly, slowly, one by one, as if her heart had to relearn how to break open. She held the drawings to her chest and wept. Not for what was taken, but for what remained. Only after the tears had stopped did she notice the small black object nestled under the papers. A USB drive. She turned it over in her hand, then crossed the room to her laptop. It hadn't been opened in days. She plugged it in. A single video file. No label. No date. Just static for a few seconds. Then the grainy footage of a familiar hallway. Briarhill's upstairs corridor, just outside Elliot's bedroom. The image jittered, then stabilized. Elliot was there, flanked by 2 staff members trying to calm him. He was screaming, red-faced, fists clenched. His voice echoed through the speakers like it had that day. Raw, panicked. "Give me Elena. Not the doctor. Not the robot lady. I don't want new people. I want her." One of the staff tried to touch his shoulder. He shoved their hand away. She listens. She makes the rain stop. Then he collapsed onto the carpet, hugging a crumpled drawing. Elena's throat tightened. Who sent this? Someone had risked a lot to get this to her. That video wasn't meant to leave the house. The drawings, maybe, Elliot could have slipped them to someone. But the footage? That was access. That was defiance. Someone inside Briarhill didn't agree with what was happening. Someone believed in her. Elena leaned back, exhaling slowly. Her heart hadn't felt this steady in days. Something shifted in her. Not anger, resolve. She stood, walked to the bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror. The circles under her eyes hadn't faded. Her curls were matted, her shirt stretched at the sleeves. But for the first time in a week, she didn't see failure staring back. She saw a woman who had survived loss once, and wasn't going to let silence steal from her again. She reached for her phone, plugged it in, waited for the screen to come to life. There would be more pain ahead, more resistance, maybe more loss. But Elliot had reached across walls, guards, and fear, and told her he still needed her. Elena sat in the corner booth of the Rosewood Diner, a chipped coffee cup cradled between her hands. The place hadn't changed. Still smelled faintly of burnt toast and lemon-scented floor cleaner. The kind of place where regulars kept to their habits and strangers didn't ask questions. She hadn't planned on coming here again. But something about the hush of the morning, the faded hum of the jukebox, told her she might find answers here. Quiet ones, the kind that didn't get written down. Tomas was mopping near the kitchen door, shoulders hunched like always, cap pulled low. He didn't look up when she called his name, just kept moving the mop in lazy figure eights on the checkered tile. "Tomas," she said gently, stepping closer. "It was you, wasn't it?" He didn't stop mopping, but his jaw clenched just slightly. "You sent the box. The drawings. The video." Still no eye contact, but the mop paused mid-swipe. "I didn't ask for thanks," he muttered. "And I sure didn't want trouble." "I'm not here to drag you into anything," she said. "But I need to understand. Why help me?" Tomas finally looked up. His face was plain but honest, the kind of tired only life can carve into a man. "Because you're the first person that boy looked in the eye. First time I ever heard him laugh was the day you showed up." "That ain't nothing." Elena's chest ached, not just from gratitude, but from the unbearable tenderness of someone believing in what she didn't dare say out loud. That maybe she had made a difference. That maybe, despite all the broken pieces, she was still capable of healing something. "I had to copy it from the backup system," Tomas went on, voice low. "Miranda don't control that one. Not yet. She'll come after you if she finds out." "I ain't stupid," he said, giving her a dry smile. "I'm quiet, not blind." Elena nodded slowly. "Thank you." That night, as she left the diner, she felt it. A shadow trailing too close, a pair of footsteps that stopped when she did. Across the street, a man sat in a black sedan, windows tinted too dark for dusk. She didn't have to guess. Kyle Deacon. She'd seen him before, lingering near her old apartment, pretending to browse newspapers outside the Co-op market, sipping coffee in the lobby of Holloway's office building. Always close enough to notice, never close enough to confront. But tonight, something inside her snapped. Not in fear, but in clarity. She couldn't hide anymore. Kyle wasn't just gathering information. He was building a story. One where she was unstable, obsessive, dangerous. The woman with a tragic past, projecting her grief onto someone else's child. She could already imagine the headlines. Elena March, from caregiver to risk. Miranda didn't need facts. She needed perception. And Kyle was her lens. Elena stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, staring straight at the car. Then she walked away. Not hurried, not shaken. Just steady. That same night, back in her apartment, she powered on her old laptop. The screen flickered before settling into its usual glow. She opened her email. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating, then moving with quiet conviction. She typed the subject line. For Elliot, and the truth. And then the message. "You don't know me, but I know what it's like to be silenced. I know what it means to lose a child. And now I'm watching another one be erased behind the same kind of walls. His name is Elliot Vance. He's 7, and everything around him is being controlled. His words, his world, his ability to feel safe. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for you to look. I've attached the video. Do what you will with it." I no longer have anything to lose. But he's still losing. And he doesn't even know why. She signed it with her full name. No hiding anymore. And hit send. Then she leaned back, exhaled, and let her shoulders settle. She wasn't just fighting to be believed. She was fighting for a boy who drew umbrellas in the rain. And maybe, for the woman she used to be. The one who still believed that love, even when broken, could be enough to matter. The coffee shop off Route 17 was one of those places with creaky floors and mismatched chairs. The kind that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon rolls that had been left in the oven 5 minutes too long. Elena sat in the corner by the window, hands wrapped around a chipped mug that had seen better days. Across from her sat Kira Hastings, a woman with short, spiky hair and eyes that didn't blink enough. She didn't take notes. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She just watched, sharp, observant, patient in a way that told Elena this was far from her first story that carried weight. When Elena finished talking, really talking, from Briarhill to the drawings, from the whisper in the diner to the USB hidden beneath children's sketches, Kira finally spoke. "I believe you," she said, her voice steady. "And I'll take the story. But only on one condition." Elena braced herself. "You need to let me tell it all. That means the accident, the loss, your history. No redactions. If I'm going to stand behind your truth, I need to give people the full truth, before Miranda twists it first." The words hung heavy between them. Outside, the wind pushed dried leaves against the window, a soft scrape like fingernails on old wood. Elena's fingers tightened around the mug. Her mind raced, back to the night of the crash, the blinking lights, the silence that followed when there should have been a cry. She had buried that pain beneath layers of survival. Not healing, just endurance. She looked down. That story, it already killed one part of me. Kira leaned in. "Then let's not let them use it to bury another." There was a long pause. Elena nodded. "Do it," she whispered. That night, the decision settled over her like ash. There was no peace in it, just clarity. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could choose not to run anymore. Kira didn't waste time. She dove headfirst into Briarhill's past, tracing old staff contracts, flagging inconsistencies in therapy reports, and gathering testimonies from former caregivers who had left suddenly with NDAs and no contact allowed. She tracked down a whistleblower from a media firm Miranda had gutted years ago, someone who knew exactly how she spun a narrative with precision so sharp, it cut reputations before they could bleed. At the same time, Elena started noticing odd things again. Strangers loitering outside her apartment building, her social media being flooded with cryptic comments, old photos being pulled and reposted with false captions. Kyle Deacon, she knew, was behind it. Back at the Vance estate, Kyle stood in the East Wing library, speaking into a burner phone. "She's cooperating with a journalist," he said. "Independent, well-connected. She's digging." Miranda didn't flinch. "Then it's time." "Time for what?" "Everything. Dump it. All of it. Let's make the world remember what kind of woman Elena March really is." The next morning, the web exploded. Anonymous blogs surfaced, alleging Elena had a history of mental instability. Tweets circulated, hinting she had once been institutionalized. Completely fabricated, but laced with just enough what-if to make people click. A conspiracy thread accused her of grooming Elliot to replace the son she'd lost, complete with a distorted photo of one of his umbrella drawings. Every ping of her phone became a threat. Every headline a knife. Elena sat in her apartment, the TV off, her laptop closed, her heart pounding in a rhythm she couldn't calm. But she didn't cry. She breathed. Slow. Controlled. Because somewhere inside her, the woman who had once cradled a boy with silent eyes and rain-soaked drawings was still standing. Still choosing not to walk away. "I said yes to the story," she told herself aloud. "So I say yes to the storm too. It wasn't courage. It was conviction, because Elliot had given her something more powerful than protection. He had given her purpose, and she wasn't going to let them take that from either of them. The article dropped on a gray Thursday morning, wrapped in a quiet fog that clung low to the Charleston streets like a breath held too long. Elena read it in full silence. Then again, and again. It wasn't a smear piece. It wasn't about what she'd done or hadn't done. It was about what had been done to her. Kira Hastings had gone in deep, layering the article with receipts, not accusations. She embedded the now-famous clip of Elliot screaming for Elena, his tiny fists pounding the carpet. She quoted Tomas, detailing what he'd witnessed working inside Briarhill. She even compared Miranda Vance's media outputs, showing how the wording of recent anonymous articles mirrored past manipulation tactics exposed in previous lawsuits. The title? When Care Becomes a Crime. The campaign against Elena March. The internet didn't explode. It simmered. For once, people didn't just consume. They questioned. Comment sections weren't just cruel. They were divided. Some asked why a grieving woman had become the target of a PR machine. Others demanded Elliot's father speak up. Still others, mothers mostly, just wrote, "She was the only one who hugged him." It was more than Elena had hoped for. But the real surprise didn't come from the public. It came from Kyle Deacon. 2 days after the article published, Kira called Elena at 11:43 p.m. Her voice, normally clipped and cool, was breathless. "He cracked," she said. "Who?" "Kyle. He came to me." Elena sat up, heart thudding. "Why would he?" He read the piece. Said he didn't expect the truth to look like that. Said he couldn't keep playing their game. Kyle had been watching Elena. Elena had known that. But what she hadn't known, what nobody had, was that Kyle wasn't just a PI with a lens and a paycheck. He was a man with his own bruises. Years ago, Kyle had testified in a domestic violence case that implicated a cousin of Miranda Vance. He was promised anonymity. Instead, the case was buried and Kyle's record, the one he thought sealed, was pulled out and held over him. Work dried up. Debts piled. Then came a call. A job. A second chance. Tied to silence. Until now. Kira didn't pressure him. She didn't have to. Kyle handed over a hard drive. Said it was everything. Internal memos. Email threads. Strategized headlines, legal drafts about preemptive defamation management, and worse, a recorded Zoom call. In it, Miranda's voice was unmistakable. "Don't confuse a child's affection with need. The boy needs routine. He needs discipline, not affection, not some woman's bleeding heart. That kind of softness will ruin him." Then came Graham's voice, quieter, more hesitant. "She's the first one who ever got him to laugh." Miranda snapped. "And that's the problem." Elena sat frozen, Kira's voice fading into the background. Not because she was shocked, but because, deep down, she had always known. Known the warmth she'd brought into Elliot's world had threatened the Vances, not because it was wrong, but because it worked. She had held him. That was her crime. "You can release this?" Elena asked. "I can," Kira said. "But it'll be war." Elena looked out her window. The sky was still that silvery shade of almost morning. She thought of Elliot, drawing umbrellas in the margins of old books. She thought of herself, 10 years younger, holding her own son's backpack outside an ICU door. She thought of every quiet moment where she could have walked away, and didn't. "Then it's time," she said. "Open the third door." "What door?" "The one they didn't plan for. The door where we walk in with the truth." A pause. Then Kira said, "I'll prepare everything." And Elena sat there, no longer the woman who knocked quietly, waited to be let in, and tiptoed around powerful people's comfort. Now, she was the one holding the key. The courtroom wasn't what Elena expected. There were no high walls or echoes of judgment. Just beige walls, over-polished floors, and the kind of cold air that felt like it came from someplace deeper than vents. The judge, a woman in her 60s with tired but alert eyes, glanced up as Elena entered. Cameras weren't allowed, but that didn't mean the world wasn't watching. The case had made it to state court not because of legal pressure, but because public pressure had boiled over. There were petitions, op-eds, hashtags. Everyone had an opinion, and yet, inside that room, everything felt hushed, like the world was holding its breath. Across the aisle, Graham Vance sat in a dark tailored suit, back rigid, jaw tight. Miranda was there too, unreadable in a navy dress and pearl earrings, flipping through her notes as though none of this was personal. Only Kyle, seated behind them, looked shaken, head down, thumb rubbing the edge of his bench as if praying for redemption. Elena had a choice. She could have brought in a defense team. Plenty had volunteered once the story broke. But she said no. "I need them to hear me," she told Kira that morning. "Not someone cleaned up and coached. Just me." When the time came, she stepped forward. No podium, just her and the truth. "I'm not a lawyer," she began, her voice steady but low. "I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. And I'm not here to fight for custody." The room held still. I was hired as a caregiver. Not a mother. Not a savior. Just someone to make sure Elliot brushed his teeth and ate something green now and then. But no one told me how often he flinched when someone reached for him, or how he never looked you in the eye, or how he sat for hours by a window, not moving. Like if he stayed quiet long enough, the world might forget he was there. She paused, just long enough to let the silence stretch. I never told him to draw me. I never asked for his trust. But one day he did. He handed me a picture of a stick figure under an umbrella, and he wrote, in the shaky way only a child could, "You're my tree." Her throat tightened, but she didn't stop. "I'm not here to demand rights. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm here to speak for something no one else in that child's life seems to value. His feelings. His tiny, imperfect, human feelings." She looked directly at Graham. "I didn't teach Elliot to need me. I showed up. That's it. And he chose to feel safe." She ended with only one sentence. "I'm not trying to win custody. I'm trying to defend a child's right to feel." For a long while, the judge didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, once, and turned her eyes to the prosecution. That's when Kira stood. "Permission to submit one more piece of evidence, Your Honor." The judge allowed it. Kira approached the screen near the bench, inserted a flash drive, and pressed play. Miranda's voice filled the courtroom, clipped and cold. "I want that child's therapy file cleaned. Any signs of attachment dependence need to be removed. Frame it as behavioral regression, not emotional bonding. Send it through HAL bridge systems. They'll know what to do." Silence again. No one looked at Miranda, not even Graham. And then the judge asked for a final item, a psychological drawing submitted earlier that week. The independent doctor had allowed Elliot to express himself in whatever form felt safe. The court clerk placed the sketch up on the projector. It was simple. A house with a red roof. 3 stick figures stood under it. One labeled me, one Dad, and one Elena. Above them, written in blocky blue crayon, "She stays." The room exhaled. Elena didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes for a moment, one heartbeat long, and let herself believe that maybe, this time, the truth would be enough. The judge called for a recess, but the message had already landed. Not in legal terms, not in rulings, in the hearts of those watching. Some things don't need gavels. They just need to be heard. The courtroom had barely settled from recess when Graham Vance rose from his seat and turned toward Miranda, his voice cracking like a whip in the heavy silence. "You said this would be quiet," he snapped. "You said you'd handle it. Now look at us." Miranda didn't flinch. Her tone, precise and cold, slid through the room like ice. "What I said, Graham, was that I'd protect the family name. You forgot what's at stake the minute you let that woman into your house." "That woman," he repeated, eyes narrowing. "You mean Elena? The only person who's seen Elliot as more than a checklist." Miranda's lips curled. "What you call love is chaos. And look what it's done to you. You used to be composed, controlled. Now you're emotional, reckless. That's what happens when you let sentiment decide for you." Graham's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Elena, seated quietly at the back of the courtroom, didn't move. She watched the unraveling without satisfaction. There was no pleasure in it, just truth slipping out, like water from a cracked dam. "You think you've protected Elliot?" Graham's voice lowered but grew heavier. "No, you protected your version of him. The one who fits into reports and routines. Not the real boy." The judge tapped her pen once, warning but not interrupting. Then Graham said it, the thing he hadn't admitted to anyone, maybe not even to himself. "I hired Elena because I didn't know how to love him. I didn't know how to connect. I thought maybe if someone else did it, I wouldn't have to face that I couldn't." It was so quiet afterward that even the rustle of the air conditioner sounded too loud. Miranda blinked once, but said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence, for once, was admission enough. And Elena saw it then. Not just the fractured siblings, but the weight they both carried. Miranda, so controlled she'd weaponized attachment. Graham, so afraid of softness he'd outsourced it. Neither of them were monsters, but neither of them had been enough for a little boy who needed more than legacy and structure. A court clerk approached the bench with a sealed folder. The judge reviewed it briefly before looking up. "Miranda Vance," she said evenly, "based on the materials submitted by both the defense and Ms. Hastings' independent investigation, you are being summoned for a formal ethics inquiry regarding your manipulation of medical records, interference with minor care plans, and potential defamation." Miranda remained composed, but her shoulders dipped a fraction. Not enough to be called defeat, but enough to say she knew the storm had begun. Graham sat back down, hands trembling in his lap. Then the judge turned to Elena. "This court finds no evidence that Ms. Elena Morgan has acted outside the boundaries of lawful or ethical childcare. Her interactions with Elliot Vance have been, by all accounts and documented observation, emotionally beneficial." Elena didn't breathe. "Not yet. In light of the child's psychological evaluations and independent recommendations," the judge continued, "we will initiate a review process for monitored contact, allowing Ms. Morgan periodic supervised visitation with Elliot pending continued assessment." Now Elena exhaled, but it wasn't relief. It was something quieter, softer. Permission to stay near the boy who taught her how to feel again. No victory banners. No applause, just a slow, silent shift. The courtroom emptied slowly after that. Miranda walked out stiff and silent, her heels sharp against the floor. Her empire cracked, but not yet crumbled. Graham remained in his seat a while longer. When he finally stood, he didn't look at Elena right away. But as he passed her, he stopped. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "But I don't want to keep failing him." She nodded once. "Then start with listening." And he did. That day, no one won. Not in the traditional sense. But something changed. Not with gavel slams or headlines. With presence. With persistence. With a kind of love that didn't shout or demand, but refused to disappear. The morning after the verdict, Elena sat on the edge of her bed. the sun filtering through slanted blinds in thin, reluctant lines. Her phone had rung 8 times before she finally turned it over. News anchors, podcasts, daytime television, all asking for her voice. She said no to every one of them. Let the noise swirl out there, she thought. She had something else to do. By noon, she stood once again at the wrought iron gates of Briar Hill Estate. Not as a nanny, not as an employee, but as a woman carrying her own story into a house that had once tried to erase it. The butler didn't announce her. He simply opened the door, eyes softer than before. Graham was in the library, seated in the same armchair he'd occupied the day he fired her. There was no bourbon in hand this time, no anger in his expression, just a heaviness that hung in the quiet like old dust. Elena walked in without waiting. She didn't need permission anymore. "I'm not here to make you feel better," she said plainly, standing in front of him. He nodded once. "I didn't ask you to. I need to say this." Her voice was steady, not cold. "Just bear. My son died in the back seat of my car." Graham blinked, but said nothing. "I was driving. Late. A client kept calling, and I picked up. The crash happened seconds later." She swallowed. "I crawled out of the wreckage. They pulled his body from the other side." She didn't cry. "Not this time. I walked around for years thinking surviving was the sin. So I punished myself by never letting another child close. Not even when I wanted to. Not even when it ached." The words fell like stones, not for sympathy, but for weight, for truth. "Elena," Graham began, but she raised a hand. "I'm not done." Her voice softened just enough to tremble. Then came Elliot, that strange, silent boy who looked at me like I was something he dreamed, but didn't believe was real. And I broke every wall I built. But this time, I'm not running. He exhaled, eyes flickering toward the fireplace that wasn't lit. "I haven't hugged my son," Graham said after a long silence. "Not since my wife died. Not once. Every time he cried, I left the room, or told him to be brave." "Why?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. He stared at his hands. "Because I didn't know what else to do. And because I thought if he saw me scared, he'd fall apart too." Elena sat down across from him. "You're not the only one who thought strength meant silence," she said. "But the truth is, my son didn't need a mother who never cried. He needed one who knew how to hold him when he did." They sat like that for a while. Two people who had failed, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Two people who had tried to protect their children by holding their pain inside, until it twisted them into strangers even to themselves. "I'm sorry," Graham said finally. "Not for what you went through. That would be arrogant of me. But for not seeing it. For not seeing you." Elena gave a small nod. "And I'm sorry I let myself become something I hated. Someone who lets another person take the fall so I can avoid my own guilt." The clock ticked quietly above them. Outside, a reporter was probably still talking about her hair, or her past, or whether or not a woman like Elena Morgan had any business being part of a boy like Elliot's life. But none of that mattered here. In this room, there were no cameras, no statements, no spin. Just two broken parents trying, in their own uneven ways, to learn how to begin again. And somehow, that was enough. The sun hadn't quite broken through the early mist when Elena stepped through the gates of Briar Hill Estate again. The air was cool with that crisp scent only late summer carries. Half warm earth, half goodbye. But she didn't wear her usual work boots this time. Her steps were quiet in soft gray flats, and over her sweater, she carried no badge, no apron. Just a tremble in her fingers and a breath that she had to remind herself to take. Graham had called it a quiet celebration. Elliot's idea. An indoor art exhibit. The once pristine hallway had been transformed. The wallpaper was still pale cream, but now lined with dozens of frames, each holding one of Elliot's crayon sketches. Bursts of color, Uneven lines, some chaotic, some surprisingly tender. There were drawings of the koi pond, a favorite stuffed animal, and one of a big tree that might have been more feeling than botany. People moved slowly, reverently. A few therapists from Elliot's care team stood near the back, nodding at each image like museum curators. Some former staff came too, people Elena hadn't seen in months, and Kira Hastings lingered near the doorway with her worn leather notebook pressed to her chest like a promise kept. But Elena didn't look at them. Her eyes scanned the space until they landed on him. Elliot stood near the end of the hall, fidgeting with the sleeves of a slightly oversized dress shirt. His hair was carefully combed, though a stubborn cowlick refused to behave. His shoes were too shiny for his liking. That much was clear from how he kept shifting his feet. He looked around, eyes searching, and when they finally met hers, just a second, no longer, it was like watching the sky break open after weeks of rain. His face lit up, and in that flash of recognition, all the doubts Elena had brought with her began to loosen. Without a word, he darted toward her, took her hand tightly in his, and led her past the other guests without so much as a glance. She let herself be guided, heart pounding, breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. They stopped in front of a covered canvas, bigger than all the others. A cream-colored sheet draped over it, like a curtain hiding a secret. Elliot looked up at her once, then lifted the fabric with a small, dramatic swoosh. The hallway hushed. The drawing revealed a kitchen bathed in yellow light, cozy and warm. Around a wooden table sat 3 figures. Elliot, grinning with a missing front tooth, Graham, holding a coffee mug in both hands, and Elena mid-laughter, placing a golden loaf of bread in the center of the table. The proportions were off, the colors bled into each other, but there was no mistaking the emotion in it. Underneath, written in shaky, careful lettering, "Family isn't who you're born from. It's who stays." The world stilled. Elena knelt beside him, her hand finding the back of his head, fingers threading through his soft curls. "Did you come up with that?" she whispered. He nodded without looking away from the drawing. "I believe you," she said, her voice a rasp of held-back tears. Later that afternoon, long after the guests had left and the smell of hors d'oeuvres had faded into memory, the garden grew quiet again. The late sun dripped gold onto the lawn, and cicadas hummed somewhere in the distance. Elliot sat beside her on the steps, a new book in his lap. He flipped through the pages slowly, then frowned. "There's no letter in this one," he said, looking up. Elena smiled, brushing a crumb from his cheek. "Not this time," she replied gently, "because I'm not going anywhere. I don't need to leave messages anymore." He seemed to think on that, staring at her with the kind of thoughtful silence children have before they declare something important. Then he nodded and leaned into her side. They stayed like that for a while, not talking, just breathing together in the soft hush of things that didn't need to be explained. From the kitchen window, Graham watched them quietly. He didn't interrupt. He just set down a second cup of coffee, letting it steam on the counter next to hers. Elena wasn't back to fix anything. She hadn't come to erase mistakes or tie a perfect bow around years of grief. She was simply here, fully, willingly, and without conditions. Elliot didn't need her to be perfect. He didn't need her to promise forever. He just needed her to stay. And she had. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but because, in a world that often left children waiting by doors that never opened, she wanted to be the person who stayed. And that, more than any paper, title, or bloodline, was what made her family. Not a happy ending, maybe, but a beginning no longer haunted by the fear of goodbye. It started quietly, just a press release from the Ethics Commission of South Carolina, stating that Miranda Vance would be stepping down from her role as editor-in-chief of the Arcline Ledger, effective immediately. The charges weren't just internal. A formal investigation had been launched. Evidence manipulation, unethical use of medical data, defamation tactics. It was a long list. Miranda didn't show up to the courthouse that week, but she did grant one final interview, an exclusive, carefully orchestrated sit-down with a cable network. Her tone, as always, was measured, crisp. But this time, it carried the fatigue of someone whose grip had finally been pried loose. When the interviewer asked her if she regretted anything, Miranda didn't flinch. "I never believed in healing," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I believed in control, order, and sometimes, order means making decisions others won't." No apology, no admission, just the unyielding logic of someone who'd never learned how to surrender. Meanwhile, life beyond the headlines moved on in smaller, quieter ways. Graham Whitmore started showing up for Elliot's school events. He arrived late to the first parent-teacher conference, flustered, tie crooked, holding a coffee cup like a lifeline. Elena was already seated when he slipped in beside her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. But then Elliot's teacher began to speak, and Graham listened, really listened. When the teacher asked if there were any concerns or insights to share, he cleared his throat. "I'm still figuring it out," he said. "But I'm here." That was all. No grand declarations. Just presence. They didn't walk out of that meeting as friends or partners or even allies, exactly. But there was something like mutual recognition now. Two people who had both failed, stumbled, and still chose to stay close to a boy who needed them more than perfect answers. Back in the city, Elena returned to Holloway Caring Network, but not as a caregiver hiding from her past. This time, she applied as a part-time coordinator, offering trauma support to families navigating loss. Her story wasn't printed on brochures or shared at every event. She preferred it that way. But when someone asked, she didn't hide. One Thursday afternoon, during a small community workshop on grief, someone in the back, an older woman with trembling hands, raised a question. "How did you survive it?" the woman asked, voice thin. "Losing a child, then being blamed, and still choosing to care again. What helped you get through?" Elena paused. Her fingers brushed the rim of her paper coffee cup, tracing the edge like it might anchor her words. "I didn't get through," she said softly. "I stayed." The room was quiet. No one filled the silence, because somehow, that was the answer they all needed. Later that evening, Elena found herself sitting in the kitchen of her apartment. The window cracked open to let in the August breeze. On her table were a few of Elliot's newest drawings he had sent her home with. One of a turtle, one of a lopsided sun, and one of the two of them sitting under an umbrella. She smiled at that one. Graham had started therapy, grief counseling specifically for widowed parents. He didn't announce it. She only found out because he'd called one day and asked, awkwardly, "Is it normal to cry in the parking lot before you even go in?" "Yes," Elena had replied, without missing a beat. And just like that, something settled between them. Not forgiveness, maybe, but something more useful, acknowledgement. Miranda's name still trended online from time to time, especially when legal updates were released. But Elena stopped clicking the articles. That chapter wasn't hers to carry anymore. The world hadn't been scrubbed clean. The scars were still there, some visible, others etched into the choices they made each day. But as one of the counselors once told her, kintsugi isn't about hiding cracks. It's about filling them with gold. She wasn't whole in the old way, but she wasn't broken in the old way either. She was here, present, with her grief, her growth, and her quiet refusal to walk away again. It wasn't in the grand structure of the house, the tall arches, the imported tiles, or the perfectly trimmed hedges. Those remained, stately as ever. The change was quieter, more human. You could feel it in the sound of children's laughter echoing down hallways that used to hold only silence. You could see it in the art taped to the walls. Crayon-drawn suns, misshapen hearts, rainbow houses with too many windows. One of the guest rooms had been converted into Elliot's free art room. The idea came from him. He'd simply asked one evening, "Can my friends come here too?" And Graham, to his own surprise, had said yes. Now, every Saturday morning, the room opened to neighborhood kids. Paint-splattered smocks, bowls of markers, construction paper in every color. Organized chaos filled the space. Elena was the quiet pulse of the room, weaving between easels, tying aprons, laughing with the kids, encouraging the shy ones. She was no longer a guest in the house. She was something else. Anchored, present, steady. That fall morning, the grass was damp with dew and the air crisp with the scent of pine mulch. Elena was in the backyard, trimming the edges of the herb garden, her gloves dotted with rosemary. She just leaned back to stretch when Elliot's small feet came pounding down the steps behind her. "Miss Elena!" he called, breathless. "I finished it." She turned, brushing dirt from her jeans. Elliot held up a fresh sheet of paper, still curling at the edges. His grin was wide, cheeks flushed with pride. The picture was simple, like all of his. A red roof, a wooden floor, but no walls. Inside the roof were dozens of people, some with gray hair, some with freckles, some too tall or too small to be real. They were all holding hands. Beneath it, in his scrawled handwriting, "Family is where there's room for more than once." Elena's throat tightened. She reached for the picture, running her thumb gently across the edge, as if it might smudge the meaning. She looked at Elliot, then up toward the house. Graham stood on the porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. He wasn't in a suit, just jeans, a soft sweater, and bare feet. He walked down the steps without a word, handed her one of the mugs, then sat beside her on the wide stone ledge. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Elena sipped slowly, warmth seeping into her fingers. Beside her, Graham watched Elliot dart across the lawn to join a cluster of kids who'd started playing tag. One of the little girls shrieked with delight when Elliot offered her a flower he'd picked from the edge of the garden. No one told him not to get his pants dirty. No one reminded him to stay within sight. It wasn't a perfect scene, but it was real. And sometimes, real was more than enough. They sat like that for a long while. Not partners, not co-parents, just 2 people who had each once been cracked open by grief, and now sat among something whole. Then, the sound of tires crunching gravel. A small sedan pulled up to the front gate. Elena turned her head just enough to see it. A woman stepped out, young, no more than 30. She held a toddler on her hip, the child's cheek pressed to her collarbone, eyes wide. The woman looked at the children scattered across the lawn, at the house, at the colors fluttering in the windows. She approached the edge of the yard, hesitant, stopping just before the steps. "Hi," she said softly, as if afraid her voice might disturb the balance of the moment. "Someone told me this is where the kids come to draw." She glanced down at the toddler. "Is there space for one more?" Elena stood. Her boots were damp, knees creaky, gloves still streaked with soil. But her voice was clear, her smile calm. "There's always room," she said. The woman blinked, then nodded. In the distance, Elliot waved from the sandbox. Elena turned back toward the porch, catching Graham's eye. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The morning sun angled just right, casting long shadows from the house with no walls. Inside its open frame, the sounds of play, healing, and quiet redemption echoed without needing permission. It was not an ending. It was something better. A beginning, again. Sometimes, family isn't about blood or paperwork. It's about presence. About who stays, especially when things fall apart. Elena didn't heal Elliot by fixing him, but by refusing to leave. So maybe the question isn't, who do you belong to? Maybe it's who chooses to stay, again and again. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe. More voices, more healing, and more truth are waiting in the next chapters.